So much of the story goes back to the animosity that's been created between the police department, which has been used as an entity to collect revenue, and the public from whom that revenue was extracted. This is a problem that's not isolated to Ferguson alone. Joining me now to discuss is Matthew Fogg, Retired Chief Deputy U.S. Marshal and author of the book Bigots with Badges. Matthew, thanks for being here. So Attorney General Holder says one of the problems here, obviously, the Ferguson Police Department, he says targeting black citizens. Manuel mentioned it a minute ago, but one of those things he mentioned, 100% of the time, canines being used on black citizens, never used on white citizens. That alone is a stark statistic, is it not?
That's no question about it. And this is something that we've been seeing across the country. Some of my experiences with departments, not just Ferguson, but across the country, New York, LAPD, Chicago. We see over and over again, I saw this with my own eyes, this sort of biased racial policing, and always raised the question, war on drugs, everything across the board. You know, we saw, I mean, even as officers, we would talk about it. You know, we would say, you know, why is it that we just seem to be focusing our enforcement operations in minorities or minority areas, and just looking at it from an overall standpoint, we saw it. I saw this coming a long time ago. Yeah,
you talk about the war on drugs. Even here in D.C., for instance, we have a policy that's used by Metro Police called jump-out cars.
That's right.
Jump-out cars essentially where plainclothes officers would jump out of a car literally and stop somebody on the street. It happens in certain parts of D.C. It does not happen in the higher income white parts of D.C. It would never be tolerated there.
That's right.
And yet the use of drugs in both communities would be equal proportionally.
That's right. And that's a problem. Again, once again, our job is to serve and protect the community, not just black or white community, but the whole community. When you look at, again, us as officers actually being involved in this, and it was the inference of get your numbers up, go out and make the arrest. And we knew that the scrutiny we would get if we went into the more affluent white areas, even though the ACLU report recently said that in black affluent areas, we still did our enforcement operations. So it just racially biased right across the board. And as officers seeing it firsthand, I was like one of the first ones to start speaking out against it.
So when you talk about getting the numbers up, there's obviously the issue of getting the numbers up for the sake of making arrests, because it looks good, obviously, for the department, and funding comes in from that. But also getting the numbers up in terms of these fines and fees. Holder talks about this one particular woman, he says, in 2007, I believe it was, she is pulled over and ends up with a $150 ticket. He says over the course from 2007 until the present, she's paid over $500 in fines and fees. At one point, she was jailed for 6 days for not paying soon enough. And he says, and even today, inexplicably, she still owes another $500. How is it that these municipalities, through the police departments, are creating a cycle where essentially somebody is ticketed and then is in a perpetual state of owing this money?
Well, again, it goes back to just Black Lives Matter. They don't matter, and that's what I was trying to say all the time. When black folks would complain a lot of times, because they would complain, they'd come down, but police would sort of just push the complaint aside, and nobody would do anything about it. And then you see this perpetual sort of reinventing of the wheel, continuously putting these people in there. And imagine that's happened to her, how many more people this has happened to. I'm saying all the time, this is going on in Ferguson. Trust me, it's going on in a lot of places.
Is it wrong to say, because I think this is an issue that's generational in many ways. There are a lot of young, even white Americans, Hispanic Americans, and black Americans who would agree that generationally, they perceive police officers as being primarily revenue collectors and revenue generators, as opposed to seeing them as someone there to serve and protect. Is that a generational issue? Is that because more and more municipalities, like what we're seeing in Ferguson, have become dependent on these fines and fees in order to sustain their budgets?
Well, I mean, that's what has been happening. The bottom line is now we see the report that's come out of the Justice Department. They have made their money, the revenue off of, but the problem is while you have this racial bias policing, it was equal enforcement opportunity operations. We wouldn't be having this conversation today, because if we were doing the same thing to affluent or white folks, somebody would have been said, oh no, this has got to stop. So what I'm saying is we see this sort of perpetual behavior constantly happening, not just on the revenue making, but on the being jailed and put in jail and being beat by police or excessive force, all of the things that we have the discretion to do.
Well, and the jailing and the prison issue, that's a whole other revenue discussion for another time.
True.
Matthew Fogg, Retired Chief Deputy U.S. Marshal and author of the book Bigots with Badges. Thanks so much.
Thank you.